creepy stories from the middle of nowhere by truck drivers. Hola everyone, it's Em here. Buckle up, pun intended, and let's dive right in. Story 1. I was running through California one night, SR 58 to be exact, to head choppy and started to get sleepy. I pulled out on the side to the road and decided to take a nap. The load I was picking up got rescheduled, and so I decided to just hang out where I was until it was closer to my normal drive time, which was at night. I was starting to learn how to do astrophotography, and where I was parked was a pretty decent spot. Nice and dark, not a lot of traffic at night. So I decided I would try and practice some shots. I climbed up onto the top of my trailer just above my reefer unit on the edge, and so they're learning how to do aperture settings and all that. All of a sudden, I hear a noise coming from the brush directly below me. I felt pretty safe in the knowledge that no animal was climbing up 13 feet 6 inches high of a trailer. I picked up my flashlight and started looking on the ground for the sound, but to my surprise, I found absolutely nothing. So I wrote it off to win and went back to figuring out camera settings. About 2 minutes later, I heard it again, this time a little further down my trailer. So I shined my flashlight out there again. Yet again, nothing, just brush. By this time, I was starting to get concerned about what I was hearing. The sound I was hearing didn't sound like a small animal, but more like someone moving around below me. The passenger door to my truck was locked, but I left the driver door unlocked. And since I was sitting close to that side of the trailer, I could see if anyone was going to approach it. I turned my light off and went back to what I was doing. About 5 minutes later, I hear someone say, "Hey." My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed my light, stood up on the trailer, and started frantically looking around the edge of the truck. Not a gosh darn thing. Nothing. Same as it was before when I searched around my light. I remained as quiet as possible, still looking around the brush with my light. Whoever was out there, I didn't want them to hear how panicked I was. It felt like time was standing still in this instance. Because it was pitch black out, no car or truck passed me in over an hour. Roughly a minute had gone by, and I heard my trailer door handle unlock and release. Now, thankfully, it was empty, so there was no load for anyone to steal. But they didn't open the door. Whoever it was unlocked the trailer door and stopped, as if to draw me to the back of the trailer. I had no time to think about what I was going to do. I snapped out of my panic freeze, jumped down to the catwalk, walked away on the back of the cab of the truck, and hit the ground as fast as possible. I jumped in the truck and locked the door, fired up the truck, and took the freak off as fast as I could. I drove for about 5 minutes, rarely taking my eyes off my side mirror to see if I was being followed. I felt like it was safe enough for me to pull off and close the door of the trailer. At this point, I'm trembling because of the pure adrenaline running through me. I stopped that truck as fast as I could, bolted to the back and shut the trailer door and locked it. Got back in the truck and left that area as fast as I could. To this day, I still don't know what the hell this person was doing or what their endgame was. I never stopped into head choppy again after that, and gave up trying to learn astrophotography too. Dang, OP, I'm sorry that this creepy person ruined your hobby for you. Although I can completely understand why you were too frightened to try again. Seems like either the person was just trying to steal something, or maybe they had something a little more sinister planned when they were trying to lure you into the back of the truck. Happy you got out safe, and who knows, maybe you'll be able to start your hobby up again. Story 2. It was about 2 a.m. passing through rural Texas making a heavy machinery delivery. The route I was taking to this farm was through rural Texas. You know the type you see in movies? That of a farm in the middle of nowhere type stuff? A house every 2 miles type deal. And little did I know this route I was gonna take was about to lead to the scariest/freakiest experience I've ever had. Hands down. Period. I have LED light bars on my truck all over the front, so when there's no oncoming traffic, I can see for literally a mile. So I'm driving down the road, minding my own business, when I can see something off in the far distance with my lights, and the closer and closer I get, it looks more and more like a person. About 200 yards from what appears to be a person, I can make out that it's a girl, because of the long hair and light-colored clothes she had on. So I slowed down a bit to not scare this girl walking in the road, and turned my brightness off so I wouldn't blind her. Truck lights are bright enough as is, so I could see her just fine without it at this point. As I got closer, she turned. And when she did, my CB radio started making some slight static. And as I passed by, she had absolutely no face at all. It looked like a hollow shell. I'm getting antsy just by typing this crap out, and you'll see why in the next paragraph. I've never flown through gear so fast in my entire life, especially with a heavy load, and I had to be doing at least 70. before I finally came back to my senses. I called the police about it, and the worst part was, they said I'm not the first person to call this in. Through the years, they've had people call in with similar descriptions of a girl walking down the road in the early morning hours, and when she turns, she has a hollowed out face. The sheriff I talked to told me about an accident that happened years back. A girl in her 20s was struck and killed by a truck speeding down that road in the early morning hours, and it dragged her so far down the road. It ground her face down to nothing on the asphalt, and she was described as having long hair and wearing light-colored clothes. The exact same description as I saw that night. Needless to say, I will never be taking that route again if I have another delivery. Ever. This one made me more sad than scared. Like, yeah, the girl sounds a little freaky, and I sure as heck wouldn't want to run into her while I was driving. But she honestly just sounds like a ghost that had something horrible happen to her. And now she doesn't know where to go. I hope she finds peace someday. Story 3. I was a taxi driver in Georgia, and one time I got a call about an $80 round trip to the outskirts of town. The GPS said 30 minutes, but for some reason it ended up taking me an hour and a half. It was the last call of the day, and I had just started a week ago, and I wanted to make an impression. So I took the call and picked up 3 ladies all dressed like hookers to someone's house, where we picked up 3 more apparently hookers in the whole way there. They were quiet as hell, made me nervous. Anyway, we were on our way to the location when I started running out of gasoline. I put in the GPS to a gas station 3 times. All of them were closed. The closer we got to the location, the less and less there were streetlights and gas stations and stores, and more dirt roads in the forest. Eventually, I had to ask them, where the freak are we going? And they said, just go. We'll pay you. And I thought, as far as we've been and as far as we're going, they better freaking pay me. Someone better pay me or heads are gonna roll. We went down a dirt road on a mountain for what seemed like 20 minutes and found one lone trailer in the middle of a farm surrounded by forests, where my signal didn't even catch. The ladies all went inside to fetch me the cash, and I hung out in my van for like 30 minutes as they all came out, argued about who's gonna pay me. Eventually, one butcher-looking scariest lady walked up and handed me $180. All she said now was, now F off, and I said, yes ma'am. I wasn't about to argue with whatever the freak was going on, so I left, and getting back was a hard time. I took so many wrong turns I ended up in Lanaga, but I found a gas station just as my car decided to die. I had to push it into the racetrack and was able to find an old but dusty map and charge my phone to figure out where the freak I needed to go to get out of this porting town. I quit my taxi the next week. Too many freaking weirdos in this business. I'm sure a bunch of Uber and Lyft drivers will probably tell similar stories to this one. It definitely feels like there are some weirdos out there who don't mind sharing their business with their driver. No hate to the women's professions, but I am a little confused on why they all went to that single trailer out in the middle of nowhere. Sounds a little fishy, but I can appreciate the hustle, I suppose. Story 4. My uncle wanted to go to town for business with a friend. It was urgent work, so my uncle searched desperately for an available cab. It was late evening, so there were scarcely any, and almost all of them were reserved. Finally, he managed to find one. However, when my uncle mentioned the destination, the cab driver straight up refused to go, because the route to that town was said to be back as it was haunted badly. On top of that, it was drizzling and visibility was quite bad. Anyway, after much insistence and an offer to pay thrice the fare, the driver relented. Soon they were halfway there. The ride was going on well when suddenly the driver pulled up in front of a bridge. My uncle asked the driver what was going on. When he asked him to be quiet, a car appeared, its 2 headlights shining through the fog, and it stopped a few meters away. Then the car door opened, and a man stepped out and walked to the edge of the bridge. He took out a cigarette and started smoking and stood there by the railing for a few minutes. Then he got back inside his car, and then it happened. My uncle and his friend had no idea about what was about to happen. After the man got inside his car, there was a brilliant flash, and my uncle had to cover his eyes for what felt like a long time. When he opened them, he saw the car in front of them up in flames. It had been struck by lightning, and they could hear the man inside screaming while being burned alive. Just as my uncle tried to open the door to help the man out, the driver commanded him to sit still and not move, and he did the same, because the driver seemed to know what he was doing. And then the car rolled along on its own, back down the path it came from, and disappeared from view. After it was over, the driver explained to them that this was a common sighting, and that's why he stopped the car in front of the bridge. The man was on his way somewhere and had pulled up on the bridge to smoke a little. But when he got back in his car, lightning struck and killed him right then and there. He said that what they saw was actually the ghost replaying his death to the spectators. Story 5. Well, in high school, I used to hang out every Friday night a couple towns away with 2 friends. This was upstate New York in the mid-90s. The drive home was about 45 minutes up and through the mountains. There was one patch of road that had no houses or streetlights for about 5 to 10 minutes straight, and always freaked me out a little seeing how dark it was. One night while I was driving this patch of road, my very worst fear occurred. The headlights from my car started to dim. Then I noticed not only the rest of the lights in the car dashboard starting to dim, but the entire car seemed to be running out of energy altogether. Before I knew it, the car started stalling and I had to pull over. I remember yelling, "No, no, please, no, freak." I was freaking the freak out because this is how every alien abduction tale begins. When I finally stopped, it was pitch black. There was no light whatsoever except from the glare of the moon. I may not have been more scared in all my life. I gave it less than a minute and I just kept trying to turn the car back on by twisting the key. It worked like a charm and the car fully came back on and I was able to get the hell out of there. Never found out why it happened to begin with. Story 2. Yet another Friday along the same patch of lightless road. This time as I was driving, I looked up into the sky to my right and saw something large, but very far away, falling out of the sky completely engulfed in fire. I've never seen anything like it, and especially the trail of fire. It was a literal fireball. I watched as it passed the mountains and disappeared. It being after midnight and desolate out, I imagined I must have just seen a UFO crash. The next day I learned that pieces of the Russian space station were said to be falling to Earth after it lost orbit and it was abandoned. OP is much more rational than I am, but I guess it also is just a product of the times. I think if something like that were to happen now, I would probably call AAA or just break down crying while calling my dad for help. The second story is pretty interesting though. How we can make up some fantastic and far out stories, and they seem to be believable, until someone is just able to actually explain what really happened. Story 6. I have some bizarre stories about working in Thailand. I was driving across the country with my wife and 2 little kids through the night. We got into a crazy monsoon storm in the mountains, Nam Nao National Park, and there had been zero traffic forever. All of a sudden, we see a giant tree that had fallen across the road. We had just passed a dangerous area where water had been pouring off of a cliff like a waterfall and thought the highway might wash out. So we were kind of trapped. We decided to just wait out the rain before turning around, but it was pretty scary considering how hard it was raining. The tree could have hit our car, and we were where the park has wild elephants, bears, and leopards. Not that animals would be out in a driving rainstorm attacking a car, but stuff you think about in the dark. Eventually, a huge dump truck pulls up behind us, and 4 guys hop out with no shirts and carrying machetes. My wife thought we were goners, but they walked past our car and started hacking away at a tree that I would guess was 4 to 6 feet thick. Soon, another huge dump truck came from the other direction and more men jumped out with machetes. Soon, there were 8 topless guys taking turns just hacking away this massive tree in a driving rainstorm. After about 30 minutes, they cut through it, and almost on cue, the rain stopped. They shoved part of the tree out of the way, waved us through, and we finished the rest of the drive without incident. I now carry a machete in my car, and I can't wait for the day I can rip my shirt off and clear the road for someone else. Story 7. My father-in-law was a bus driver in Mexico for 25 years. One of his many stories was one time he and my mother-in-law took a tag along for the rides. Sometimes we come back to Mexico City from somewhere in the north. The bus was pretty empty except for a few passengers, and a common thing to do if your bus was empty was to pick up people that needed a lift in the small towns you passed through to make a couple bucks. They were going through a small town at night and saw a large group of people waiting by a bus stop. My father-in-law decides to stop and pick up these people. They all get on and seat themselves quietly, and nothing out of the ordinary. They got going and didn't pay attention to the people as my father-in-law was concentrating on driving, and my mother-in-law was in the front seat and fell asleep. Finally reached their destination. When my in-laws finally looked back and expected to see the passengers they picked up, there was no one. Only a few actual passengers. My mother-in-law frantically asked one of the passengers what happened to all the people, and the passenger replied, "What people?" The driver stopped in the town at that stop and opened the doors, but no one came on. Definitely a little weird. Maybe it was a force of habit and both your father-in-law and mother-in-law imagined them to be there. Or maybe they were a group of hitchhiking ghosts. Story 8. Many years ago, we were driving back to Southern California from a cabin stay in Northern California. This was a huge car accident on the freeway that was adding 4 hours to our drive. This was when TomToms were at their peak and started to come standard with traffic avoiding redirection. Anyway, the TomToms chime up as the sun's going down and say it can save us 3 hours if we get off the freeway. Then it proceeds to lead us through the moonless night on a rural road surrounded by cornfields. I turned to my wife and said, "I've seen this movie before, keep your eyes open." A few minutes later, there's a van on the side of the road with its hazards on. And normally I would stop and help, but no way, not tonight, Satan. And for the next hour of driving, having no idea what was around us or where we were. It was one thing after another. Broken down cars with hazards on, having semis on either side of us, making us hold our breath that they wouldn't force us to stop. Too many of every horror film trope for a simple 1-hour detour.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.